Before we begin, if you want the full continuation of these stories, more uncensored 18-plus ancient BL content, extended scenes, and unlimited royal forbidden romance, you can join us on Patreon at SpicyAncientBL. YouTube does not allow us to show or monetize everything freely here, so the deeper and more intense versions are waiting for you there. You can find the link in the description and pinned comment. Chapter 1: The Lantern Festival. Rain slid down the carved wooden lattices of the Eastern Palace in silver streaks. Lin Wei stood alone in the center of the grand chamber, staring at the feast he had spent hours preparing. The candles had burned low, their wax pooling onto the bronze holders. The lotus soup had gone cold. The plum wine sat untouched in its porcelain jug. Outside, the distant midnight bell of the imperial city tolled heavily. Wei swallowed hard. Another festival ruined. He stared at the small scroll a servant had delivered an hour ago, delayed at the High Council. "Do not wait for me, Jian." The words felt like a physical blow. 5 years. 5 years at the side of Crown Prince Jian, the future ruler of the empire, and Wei still came second to the court. At least, that was what he used to believe. The truth was much uglier. Wei slowly knelt by the low wooden table, forcing himself not to cry. His heart was heavy, and the delicate scent of white tea that usually followed him felt suffocating in the empty room. Lonely. He closed his eyes. This wasn't how love was supposed to feel in the palace. When he had first met Jian at 22, the young prince had seemed perfect. Dazzling, confident, powerful. Jian had saved Wei's family from political exile, brought him into the inner court, gifted him silk robes, and promised him forever. Wei believed every single word. He gave Jian everything: his loyalty, his body, his entire future. But lately, Jian barely looked at him. No lingering touches, no whispered conversations in the dark, just empty promises and cold, lonely nights. The heavy wooden doors finally creaked open at nearly 1 in the morning. Wei quickly stood. Jian walked inside, his expensive midnight blue robes damp from the rain. His sharp, handsome features looked exhausted, but not guilty. Never guilty. "You're awake?" Jian asked, unfastening his silver belt. Wei laughed bitterly. "It's the Lantern Festival." Jian sighed, tossing his wet cloak to the floor. "I told you I was busy." "You've been busy for months." The Crown Prince looked at him as though Wei were a nuisance. "Can we not fight tonight?" Wei stared at him in disbelief. Wei was expressing pain. Jian considered it fighting. "I made the lotus soup," Wei whispered. Jian glanced at the cold porcelain bowls. "I already ate at the pavilion." Something shattered inside Wei. He looked away before the tears could fall. "I understand." Jian walked closer, smelling faintly of rain, and kissed the side of Wei's head absent-mindedly. "I'll make it up to you." The words sounded rehearsed, empty. Wei no longer believed them. That night, Jian fell asleep almost immediately on the grand bed. Wei didn't. At 3 in the morning, Wei stood up to pour himself a cup of water. As he walked past Jian's discarded robes, a small, heavy object slipped from the inner pocket and hit the floor with a soft thud. Wei froze. He knelt down. It was a jade token, but not an imperial one. It was carved with the crest of the Prime Minister's family. Wrapped around it was a scented silk ribbon and a folded piece of parchment. Normally, Wei respected the prince's privacy. Normally. But something deep inside his chest screamed, "Look." With trembling hands, Wei unrolled the paper. "My prince, the hours without you feel like years. Next time, tell the guards to leave us for the entire night. Ming." Wei's breath stopped. His heartbeat thundered in his ears. Ming, the Prime Minister's youngest son. Wei's hands started shaking violently. "No, no, no, no." His throat closed painfully as he reached into the prince's robe and pulled out more letters. Hidden deep in the lining. Months' worth of them. Words of devotion, promises of political marriage, descriptions of stolen nights in the bamboo gardens. Jian holding another man, touching him, promising him the exact things Wei thought belonged only to him. The oldest letter dated back nearly a year. A year. Wei covered his mouth to stop himself from screaming. His chest hurt so badly he thought his heart might actually stop. Jian had lied repeatedly, casually, cruelly, and somehow the betrayal hurt worse, because in these letters, Jian sounded happy, truly happy. Wei looked at the sleeping prince on the bed, the man he loved, the man who looked him in the eyes and lied to him every single day. For the first time in 5 years, Wei realized he didn't recognize the person beside him anymore. Chapter 2. The Severed Thread. Morning arrived too quickly. Wei had not slept a single moment. His eyes burned from crying silently on the cold floor of the adjoining room. Jian emerged from behind the silk screens, dressed in his golden court robes, fastening his jade-heavy belt. "Are you all right?" Jian asked casually. Wei nearly laughed. The audacity. The prince smelled faintly of another man's plum blossom incense beneath his sandalwood oils. Wei noticed it now. How had he been so blind before? "I found the letters." Jian stopped moving. Silence filled the chamber, heavy, dangerous. Then, Jian slowly exhaled, his expression hardening. "You went through my personal garments." Wei stared at him in absolute shock. "That's your response?" Jian rubbed his temples, annoyed. "Wei, how much did you read?" "How long?" Wei demanded, his voice shaking. The prince said nothing. "How long have you been touching him behind my back?" 10 months, Jian said flatly. Wei physically flinched. 10 months, nearly a year of being made a fool. Why? Jian's jaw tightened. "It's politics, Wei. The prime minister's backing is essential for my claim to the throne. It just happened." "No," Wei whispered, tears spilling over his lashes. "Betrayal doesn't just happen." Jian looked genuinely frustrated now. "I didn't mean for it to become a permanent arrangement." Wei laughed, a broken, agonizing sound. "He wrote that you promised to make him your official consort." The prince looked away, and that silence said everything. Wei felt like he was drowning in the middle of the room. "Did you ever love me at all?" Jian's eyes finally softened, just a fraction. "Of course I did." Did. Past tense. Wei stepped back, as though he had been struck. The realization destroyed him entirely. Jian had emotionally abandoned this relationship long ago. Wei was simply the very last person to realize it. "I am leaving the Eastern Palace," Wei whispered. Jian frowned sharply. "Don't be ridiculous. Where would you go?" "Anywhere but here." Wei walked to the wooden chest in the corner and began throwing his few personal belongings inside. Just his own things. None of the silks or jewels Jian had given him. Jian followed him, his voice rising in authority. "Wei, do not overreact." Wei froze. He slowly turned around. "Overreact? You have been sleeping with another man for a year, and you haven't even said you are sorry." "I am the Crown Prince," Jian snapped. "I am allowed concubines. I am allowed political alliances." "But I was supposed to be your heart," Wei whispered, his voice cracking. "You told me I was your heart." Jian's expression tightened. "Where are you going?" "I don't know." That answer sounded pathetic, but it was honest. Wei truly had nowhere. His family was in a distant, impoverished province. His entire life, his entire world, revolved around this one man. And now, that man no longer wanted him. Jian suddenly reached out and grabbed his wrist. Hard. "You are being dramatic. Put the chest down." Wei slowly looked down at the hand holding him, the exact same hand that had undressed another man. His voice dropped to a dead, hollow whisper. "Please let me go." Something in Wei's completely broken tone finally made Jian loosen his grip. Wei packed quietly. Neither of them spoke another word. When Wei finally walked out into the cold morning air with one wooden chest and a shattered heart, Jian did not follow him. Jian did not stop him. And that hurt most of all. Chapter 3. The Emperor's Gaze. Rain poured heavily as Wei stood outside the towering gates of the imperial city. He had tried to find lodging at 3 different inns in the capital, but the Lantern Festival had filled every room in the city. By evening, Wei sat miserably under the small awning of a closed tea shop, clutching his wooden chest. He was freezing, exhausted, completely heartbroken. He had absolutely no idea what to do. Suddenly, the sound of marching boots and heavy wooden wheels echoed through the flooded street. A massive, ornate black palanquin, guarded by imperial soldiers in dark armor, stopped directly in front of him. Wei ignored it, keeping his head down until the heavy silk curtain was pulled back. "Lin Wei," a deep, commanding voice, a voice that made the earth itself seem to vibrate. Wei looked up and his blood ran cold. He immediately dropped to his knees in the mud. Emperor Tianyi, Jian's father, the ruler of the empire, looked as fearsome and elegant as ever. Sharp, aristocratic features framed by dark hair lightly touched with silver. His golden eyes immediately narrowed with dark concern. Emperor Tianyi was 45. Powerful, ruthless to his enemies, cold to his court, but strangely, always kind to Wei. During the 5 years Wei had loved Jian, the emperor had always treated him with an unexpected warmth. He remembered Wei's favorite teas, asked if the palace servants were treating him well, and listened carefully whenever Wei spoke at banquets. Things Jian had slowly stopped doing. "What are you doing out here in the rain?" the emperor asked, his voice cutting through the storm. Wei quickly wiped his wet face, bowing his head. "Nothing, Your Imperial Majesty." Tianyi clearly noticed the wooden chest, and the trembling shoulders, and the tears. Wei's throat tightened. The emperor pushed the carriage door open himself, a gesture unheard of for a ruler. "Get in. I am unworthy. I am fine, Your Majesty." That was not a request. Despite the absolute authority in his words, Tianyi's tone carried a strange, heavy gentleness. Wei hesitated, shivering violently, before slowly climbing into the massive carriage. The scent inside wrapped around him instantly, dark sandalwood and burning incense. Comforting, stable, terrifyingly powerful, so unlike Jian's sharp, boyish scent. Tianyi studied him carefully as the carriage began to move. What happened? Wei tried to stay silent. He truly tried. He failed. A quiet sob broke from his lips. Tianyi went completely still. The temperature inside the carriage seemed to drop 10 degrees. A dark, dangerous expression crossed the emperor's face. Wei had never seen him truly angry before, but now, the most powerful man in the world looked utterly furious. "Where were you planning to stay tonight?" Tianyi asked quietly. I don't know yet, Your Majesty." Tianyi stared at him for several agonizing seconds. Then, he spoke, his voice leaving absolutely no room for argument. "You will stay with me." Wei blinked in shock. "No, I cannot." "You can. It would be highly inappropriate. You are not sleeping in the mud." Tianyi's jaw tightened dangerously. Wei looked down at his trembling hands. He hated feeling helpless, but he was freezing, emotionally destroyed, and completely alone. Tianyi gave a sharp command to the guards outside. "To the Heavenly Dragon Pavilion, my private estate." Wei watched the rain blur the lanterns outside the window. He had no idea that stepping into this carriage would change the entire course of his life. Chapter 4. Sanctuary. The Heavenly Dragon Pavilion sat high on a secluded mountain overlooking the capital. It was the emperor's private retreat. Wei had only seen it from a distance. The estate was massive, yet strangely warm. Soft golden lanterns, dark mahogany wood, the distant sound of wind through the bamboo forest. Nothing like the cold, politically tense Eastern Palace where Jian lived. Servants quickly prepared a grand guest chamber, while the emperor himself poured a cup of hot ginger tea. "You should eat," the older man said softly. "I'm not hungry, Your Majesty." That wasn't a suggestion either. Despite his broken heart, a weak smile touched Wei's lips. Tianyi always sounded like a general commanding an army, even when he was just trying to take care of someone. The emperor placed the warm porcelain cup in Wei's hands. Then, his golden eyes darkened. "Did my son strike you?" Wei looked startled. "No, never." Tianyi visibly relaxed, but the deep, simmering anger returned quickly. "I raised him better than this." Wei quietly stirred his tea. Perhaps people just change in the pursuit of power. Tianyi watched him carefully. "No, good men do not betray those who have given them their devotion." The words nearly made Wei cry all over again, because the emperor sounded genuinely disappointed in his son, unlike Jian, who only seemed inconvenienced by the breakup. "You do not have to defend him to me," Tianyi added softly. Wei looked down at his reflection in the tea. "I still love him." Tianyi's expression became completely unreadable, a mask of stone. "That will fade." Wei wasn't sure. Right now, the pain in his chest felt like it would last 1,000 lifetimes. That night, surrounded by the faint scent of sandalwood, Wei finally slept deeply for the first time in months. No waiting by the door, no anxiety, no loneliness. Just absolute silence and safety. Chapter 5. Unspoken Truths. Over the next week, Wei remained hidden at the emperor's private pavilion while searching for a way to leave the capital quietly. But the city felt different now. Everything below the mountain reminded him of Jian. The gardens they walked in, the tea houses they visited, the very steps of the palace. Pain followed him like a shadow. Meanwhile, Emperor Tianyi became a constant presence. Steady, reliable, unexpectedly gentle. He never pushed Wei to talk, but somehow, Wei always ended up speaking to him. One evening, they sat on the wooden terrace overlooking the misty valleys below. The rain rolled softly across the curved roof. Wei quietly asked, "Did Jian always struggle with loyalty?" Tianyi sighed heavily, setting down his brush. "Yes." Wei looked surprised. The emperor leaned back in his carved chair. Jian's mother, the late empress. She cared only for power. She taught him that emotions were weaknesses to be discarded when a better political alliance appeared. "I tried to correct that teaching. I failed. That doesn't excuse what he did." "No." Tianxi's eyes darkened. "It absolutely does not." Wei wrapped his hands around his warm cup. "Sometimes I wonder if I simply wasn't beautiful enough. Or noble enough. If I wasn't enough for him." Tianyi answered immediately, his voice sharp. "That is not true." The absolute certainty in the emperor's voice startled Wei. Tianyi looked deeply into Wei's eyes. "You gave that foolish boy everything. You gave him peace. You gave him your youth." Wei felt a strange warmth spread through his chest, because someone finally saw it. All the sacrifices, all the quiet nights waiting, all the devotion. Tianyi saw it. The emperor studied him for a moment too long, his golden eyes lingering on Wei's lips before he forced himself to look away toward the mountains. "You deserve someone who chooses you every single day." Wei's heartbeat strangely quickened. The mountain wind carried Tianyi's sandalwood scent toward him. Warm, dominant, dangerous. Wei quickly stood up, his pulse fluttering in his throat. I should retire for the night." Tianyi nodded slowly, but neither of them missed the heavy, electric tension that had suddenly filled the air between them. Before we continue deeper into the palace secrets, if you are enjoying this forbidden royal tension, remember, the extended and uncensored 18+ continuation of this exact story is available on Patreon at SpicyAncientBL. The link is in the description and pinned comment. Now, let us return to the Heavenly Dragon Pavilion. Chapter 6. The Prince's Rage. 2 weeks later, the Crown Prince finally appeared. Wei was in the courtyard, helping a servant arrange white plum blossoms, when the heavy wooden gates slammed open. Jian stormed inside, looking furious, flanked by 2 nervous royal guards. Wei froze. His heart reacted instantly to the familiar voice, painfully. Jian looked exhausted. His robes were slightly rumpled, his hair less perfect than usual. He looked agitated, angry. "You completely disappeared," Jian spat, striding forward. Wei stared at him coldly. "You broke my heart." Jian clenched his jaw. "Can we talk privately?" "No." The young prince's eyes darkened. "Do not act childish, Wei. Come back to the Eastern Palace." Before Wei could respond, a terrifying voice cut through the courtyard like a steel blade. He said no. Emperor Tianyi descended the wooden steps, his dark robes flowing behind him. He looked like a god of war, calm, lethal. Jian stiffened immediately, bowing awkwardly. "Imperial father." The emperor's expression remained icy. "You embarrass this dynasty with your shouting." Jian scoffed, losing his temper. "This is between me and my attendant. You made it my business when you betrayed someone under my protection." Wei blinked. "Under my protection?" The words made his chest tighten inexplicably. Jian looked between his father and Wei suspiciously. "He is staying here? With you?" "Temporarily," Wei said quickly, suddenly feeling very defensive. Jian looked at Wei, a possessive anger flaring in his eyes. Tianyi's gaze sharpened into daggers. "Watch your tone in my courtyard, Jian." Jian laughed bitterly. "This is insane." Wei crossed his arms, his hands hidden in his silk sleeves to hide their trembling. "What do you want, Jian?" Jian looked at him intensely, all his royal arrogance cracking for a second. "I made a mistake." Wei felt tears threaten his eyes again, because a foolish part of him still wanted to believe that. But then he remembered the letters, the hidden jade token, the months of lies. "A mistake happens once," Wei whispered. "You made choices. Every single day, you chose him. Jian looked frustrated, stepping closer. I ended the arrangement with Ming. I told him it was over. Wei's stomach twisted. The fact that Jian only ended the political affair after being caught made everything so much worse. I don't care. Jian stared at him in disbelief. You're really throwing away 5 years over this? Wei laughed, a painful, broken sound. You threw them away first. Jian opened his mouth, then closed it, because deep down, he knew Wei was right. Tianyi stepped forward, placing his large body entirely between Jian and Wei. You should leave. Jian glared at his father. Something ugly and dark flickered in the young prince's expression, as he noticed how closely Wei stood behind the emperor. For the first time ever, Jian looked violently jealous. Chapter 7. The Lotus Fever. Wei's body broke down 3 days later. The emotional stress, the heartbreak, and the sudden shift in his life triggered a severe physical collapse. The palace physicians called it a qi deviation, an intense, burning fever that left the body hypersensitive, trembling, and desperate for the grounding presence of a strong energy. Wei woke in the middle of the night, sweating profusely, his skin burning, his breathing ragged. The faint scent of white tea that naturally clung to him spiked into the air uncontrollably. He groaned, curling into the silk blankets. Every instinct in his feverish mind screamed for comfort, for touch, for an anchor. Usually, Jian's presence would soothe his stress fevers. But now, Wei was alone. He shakily reached for the cooling herbs on the bedside table, but his trembling hand knocked the porcelain bowl to the floor. It shattered loudly. A sharp knock came at the door. Wei, the emperor. Tianyi immediately entered after hearing the crash, then froze halfway across the room. The chamber was thick with the sweet, distressed scent of Wei's fever. Wei curled deeper into the blankets, utterly humiliated. I'm sorry, I'm unwell. Tianyi quickly averted his eyes, fiercely respectful. Your fever has broken through the suppressants. Wei nodded weakly. His skin felt like it was on fire. Tianyi picked up the shattered pieces of porcelain. I will call for the imperial physician. No. Wei reached out blindly and grabbed the emperor's wrist. Please, don't. The contact shocked them both. Fever made the body intensely sensitive to touch, and Tianyi's skin, God, he was so warm. His pulse was steady, strong, and his scent, rich, dark sandalwood and spice, flooded Wei's senses, immediately soothing the violent trembling in his chest. Wei realized what he had done and released the emperor's wrist instantly, pulling his hand back as if burned. I'm sorry. Forgive me. Tianyi's voice sounded rougher, deeper than usual. You do not need to apologize to me. The emperor walked toward the open window, gripping the wooden frame tightly, clearly trying to give Wei space. But Tianyi's own instincts were reacting to the distressed person in his room. Wei could smell it, the sandalwood scent deepening, growing dominant, protective, dangerous. The realization sent a different kind of heat straight to Wei's core. This was wrong. This was so incredibly wrong. Tianyi was the emperor. He was Jian's father. Yet, Wei's body kept leaning toward him, kept craving him. Tianyi finally spoke, his voice strained with absolute control. I can arrange for a trusted servant to sit with you through the night. The thought of anyone else being in this room made Wei's chest tighten with panic. No. Tianyi looked over his shoulder. The room became unbearably tense. The silence was thick enough to cut with a sword. Wei's breathing grew uneven. He looked up at the fearsome ruler of the empire with tear-filled eyes. Please, stay. Tianyi closed his eyes briefly. A muscle ticked in his jaw. That single request clearly cost the emperor every ounce of his legendary iron control. But he stayed. He stayed the entire night, sitting beside the bed, cooling Wei's burning forehead with damp cloths, bringing him water, speaking in a low, soothing rumble whenever Wei cried out in his sleep, never once taking advantage, never once crossing the boundary. And somewhere during those endless, feverish hours in the dark, Wei realized something absolutely terrifying. He trusted Tianyi more than he had ever trusted Jian. Chapter 8. Crossing Lines. After the fever broke, the air between them changed entirely. Wei couldn't stop noticing the emperor. He noticed the way Tianyi's deep voice softened exclusively for him, the way his broad shoulders filled a doorway, The way he remembered every detail Wei ever mentioned. The way Tianyi looked at him when he thought nobody was watching, with a hunger that could burn down cities. And Tianyi clearly noticed the shift in Wei too. A polite, careful distance grew between them. Necessary for survival, but the unspoken tension followed them everywhere, thick and electric. One evening, unable to sleep, Wei wandered into the imperial library. Tianyi stood there in loose, informal black silk robes, unrolling a scroll under the candlelight. He looked up as Wei entered. For a long moment, neither spoke. The rain patted gently against the paper windows. Then, Tianyi quietly said, "You should leave the pavilion. I have arranged a quiet estate for you in the southern province." The words hit Wei's chest like an arrow. He looked down, his heart aching. "Do you want me gone?" Tianyi answered immediately, "No, too fast, too honest." The older man sighed heavily, setting his hands flat on the desk. "That is the problem, Wei." Wei's heartbeat stumbled. Tianyi stepped around the heavy wooden desk, walking slowly toward him. "You are healing, you are vulnerable, and I am trying very, very hard to be an honorable man." Wei looked up. Their eyes locked. The air vanished from the room. "Do you know how difficult it is?" Tianyi whispered, his golden eyes flashing with restrained fire. "To watch someone you cherish be destroyed by someone else, and to want to protect them from everything in this world?" Wei's breath caught in his throat. Nobody had ever spoken to him like that. Not even Jian. Especially not Jian. Tianyi continued, his voice a low, devastating rumble. "I cared about you long before my son broke your heart." Wei's eyes widened. "What?" The emperor looked deeply conflicted. "I never acted on it. I never crossed the line. But I saw you. Every day, I saw you. Years of restrained emotion. Years." Wei suddenly understood. Tianyi had feelings for him from the very beginning, but he buried them, locked them away, because Wei belonged to the Crown Prince. The realization shook Wei to his very soul. "You never said anything," Wei breathed. "How could I?" Tianyi asked bitterly, his fists clenching at his sides. "You were my son's chosen companion. You loved him." Wei's heart pounded so hard he thought his ribs would crack. Tianyi stared at him silently. The candlelight flickered across the sharp angles of the emperor's face. "And now," Tianyi whispered, stepping so close Wei could feel the heat radiating from his chest, "I don't know how much longer I can pretend I feel nothing." The world stood entirely still for one dangerous moment. Neither moved, neither breathed. Then, Wei took a step back first, because if he stayed even a second longer in the emperor's gravity, he knew he would kiss him. Chapter 9. Palace Whispers. News spread like poison through the elite circles of the imperial court. Lin Wei, the crown prince's former companion, living at the emperor's private estate. The whispers exploded into full-blown scandal within weeks. Ministers speculated, nobles judged, and Jian exploded when he finally heard the rumors. He arrived at the imperial court furious, cornering Wei in the Lotus Gardens after a morning council meeting. "You're sleeping with my father." Wei recoiled, disgusted by the accusation. "No," Jian laughed harshly, grabbing Wei's arm. "You expect me to believe that? You moved straight from my bed to his." "You cheated on me," Wei snapped, ripping his arm free. "You do not get to question my honor." Jian stepped closer, his face twisted with dark possessiveness. "You were mine." The words sparked a sudden, violent anger inside Wei. "No, I was yours." Past tense. The crown prince's expression darkened dangerously. "You can't seriously want him. He is twice your age. He is a warlord." Wei froze. Because the truth was, a part of him did want Tianyi, more than he wanted to admit. Jian saw the hesitation in Wei's eyes. The realization visibly shattered the prince. He stumbled back a step. You actually have feelings for him." Wei said nothing. Jian looked horrified, and then, deeply, ironically betrayed. "You are unbelievable." "You betrayed me first," Wei said coldly. "That is different. That was politics." The sheer hypocrisy made Wei laugh bitterly. "How is it different, Jian?" Jian struggled to answer, his face red with fury, because there was no answer. Suddenly, the heavy footsteps of imperial guards echoed on the stone path. Emperor Tianyi appeared from the arched gateway, his presence instantly suffocating the garden. "Leave him!" Tianyi's voice was lethal. Jian looked between his father and Wei, his rage boiling over. You really want him? Jian demanded of the emperor. You would take the leftovers of your own son? Smack. The sound of the emperor's hand striking the crown prince's face echoed across the quiet garden. Jian fell to the ground, holding his bleeding lip in absolute shock. Tianyi stood over him, trembling with divine fury. You lost the right to claim him the moment you betrayed his loyalty. Speak of him with disrespect again, and I will strip you of your title. Jian's eyes burned with hatred. He looked at Wei one final time. If you do this, his voice cracked, you destroy this dynasty. Wei's heart physically hurt, because despite everything, he had never wanted to cause pain. But Jian had started this destruction a year ago in the dark. The young prince finally stood up, bowed mockingly, and walked away. And for the first time since the breakup, Wei cried for the boy he used to love, who was now truly gone. Chapter 10. The First Kiss. Days passed in painful, suffocating silence. Wei avoided the emperor, not because he disliked him, but because he liked him far too much, and that terrified him. One storm-swept evening, a violent wind blew through the mountain pass, extinguishing nearly all the lanterns in the Heavenly Dragon Pavilion. The estate fell dark. Wei walked into the grand library and found Tianyi standing by the window, lighting a single red candle. The soft, golden light flickered across the emperor's sharp features, casting dark shadows over his broad chest. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other across the room. The tension between them had reached its breaking point. Wei, the way Tianyi said his name sounded dangerous, gentle, hungry, restrained. Wei swallowed hard, his hands trembling. We shouldn't. I know. But neither of them moved away. The rain thundered against the wooden roof. The grand library suddenly felt incredibly small, intimate. Tianyi stepped closer, his boots silent on the wooden floor. He stopped mere inches from Wei, looking down at him with eyes that burned with years of starvation. If you tell me to stop, the emperor whispered, his voice deep and ragged. I will. Wei's heart raced violently. He should stop this. He should turn around and walk back to his chamber. This was scandal. This was forbidden. But for the first time in his entire life, someone was looking at him like he was the most precious thing in the world, like he mattered, like he was cherished. Wei realized he was tired of starving for love. So instead of stepping away, Wei closed the final distance. Their kiss was soft at first, careful, almost disbelieving. Then, Tianyi made a rough, broken sound deep in his throat and pulled Wei flush against his chest. Years of iron restraint cracked and shattered in a single second. The kiss deepened, emotional, desperate, consuming. Wei's hands tangled desperately in the emperor's dark silk robes as tears burned hot behind his eyes. Because this kiss felt absolutely nothing like Jian. There was no distraction here, no indifference, no coldness. Tianyi kissed him like he had been dying of thirst for years, and Wei was the only water left in the world. When they finally separated, both of them were breathing unevenly. Tianyi rested his forehead against Wei's, his large hands trembling where they held Wei's waist. We just crossed a line we can never uncross, Wei whispered shakily. I know, Tianyi murmured, pressing a soft kiss to Wei's cheek. And neither of them regretted it. Not even a little. Chapter 11. Mending. Their relationship changed quietly in the shadows of the pavilion. There were no public announcements, no royal decrees, just stolen moments, morning tea shared on the terrace, late-night conversations about the empire. Lingering touches in the library, secret, breathless kisses behind closed doors. Slowly, gently, Wei began to heal. The heavy, crushing sadness Jian had left behind no longer consumed him. Every single morning, Tianyi helped rebuild the broken pieces of Wei's heart. Carefully, patiently, like he was handling priceless porcelain. One night, while lying together on a fur rug by the hearth fire, Wei rested his head on the emperor's chest. When did you start liking me? Wei asked softly, listening to Tianyi's steady heartbeat. Tianyi smiled faintly, his fingers gently playing with Wei's long dark hair. The very first time you visited the imperial gardens with my son. Wei blinked, looking up. That was 5 years ago. I know. Tianyi looked deeply into the fire. You had stopped to help an old servant carry water, ruining your own silk robes in the process. Most nobles ignore the servants. You didn't. Wei felt heat rise to his cheeks. That's nothing special. Tianyi laughed quietly. No, Wei. You were sunlight in a palace made of shadows. Wei's chest tightened painfully. Nobody had ever described him like that. Tianyi brushed a strand of hair gently from Wei's forehead. But you loved my son, so I stayed in the dark. Wei looked down, resting his hand flat over the emperor's heart. I thought he loved me too. Tianyi kissed the top of Wei's head, his lips lingering. His failure to love you was not your fault. And somehow, hearing the emperor of the world say those simple words healed a wound deep inside Wei that he didn't even know was still bleeding. Chapter 12. The Weight of the Crown. Eventually, a secret like theirs became impossible to hide. Court spies whispered. Servants gossiped. Jian stopped attending the imperial court entirely, refusing to speak to his father. The political pressure became overwhelming. One night, Wei finally broke under the weight of the guilt. This is ruining your dynasty, Wei said, standing in the doorway of the emperor's study. Tianyi looked up from his scrolls immediately. No, it is not. Yes, it is. Wei's voice cracked. The ministers think I am a manipulative seducer. They think I planned this. Tianyi's eyes hardened into steel. The ministers are fools who do not dictate my life. Wei shook his head, tears spilling down his cheeks. You are losing your own son because of me. The emperor stood up, his massive frame casting a long shadow, and walked across the room until he was standing right in front of Wei. I am losing a son, Tianyi said firmly, because he refuses to accept the consequences of his own selfish actions. Wei looked away, the guilt eating him alive. I never wanted to cause a war between you two. Tianyi gently lifted Wei's chin, forcing him to meet his golden gaze. Look at me. Do you regret us? Wei opened his mouth, then closed it. Because despite the scandal, despite the court's judgment, despite the pain, he didn't, not once. Tianyi saw the answer in Wei's tear-filled eyes and smiled softly. Then that is enough for me. Wei suddenly threw his arms around the emperor's neck, crying into his shoulder. Not from sadness, but from pure, overwhelming relief, because someone finally loved him without making him feel like he was a burden. Chapter 13. The Final Bow. Nearly 6 months after the breakup, Crown Prince Jian appeared one last time. But this time, the arrogant prince looked utterly broken. Wei found him standing outside the gates of the Heavenly Dragon Pavilion late at night. The rain soaked Jian's fine robes, plastering his hair to his pale face. Dark circles shadowed his once bright eyes. You look terrible, Wei whispered softly, standing under an oiled paper umbrella. Jian laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. I deserve that. Wei remained silent. The young prince looked at him for a long, agonizing moment. You really love him, don't you? Wei's heartbeat slowed. This time the answer came effortlessly. Yes. A flash of genuine, devastating pain crossed Jian's face. I kept thinking. I kept hoping you would eventually come back. Wei looked at him sadly. You stopped choosing me long before I ever left. Jian swallowed hard, his throat bobbing. I know. The rain fell harder between them, washing away the last ghosts of their shared past. I hated seeing you with him, Jian admitted quietly, his voice breaking. But I think I understand why you stayed. Wei looked surprised. Jian gave a sad, broken smile. He looks at you exactly the way I should have. Silence hung heavy in the mountain air. Then, Jian whispered, I really did love you, Wei. Wei's chest ached, because he believed him. Jian did love him, just not enough to protect him, not enough to stay loyal, not enough to fight for them before he destroyed everything. Wei stepped closer and gently touched the prince's wet shoulder. I hope one day you become a man capable of loving someone properly. Jian closed his eyes briefly. A single tear mixed with the rain on his cheek. He nodded once. That night, the crown prince turned and walked away into the storm. And for the very first time, Wei truly, finally, let him go. Chapter 14. The Jade Ring. Spring arrived slowly, chasing away the cold. The plum blossoms around the pavilion bloomed beautifully, painting the world in shades of pink and white. Life felt calmer now, softer, healing. Wei sat beside Emperor Tianyi in the garden one evening, while the sunset painted the sky in brilliant gold. "You are thinking too loudly," Tianyi murmured, pouring them both a cup of tea. Wei smiled, leaning his head on Tianyi's strong shoulder. "I was just thinking about how strange destiny is." "How so?" "A year ago, I thought my world was completely ending." Tianyi intertwined his large, scarred fingers with Wei's delicate ones. "And now?" Wei looked up at the fearsome ruler who held his heart so gently. "Now I think it was only just beginning." Deep emotion flickered across Tianyi's golden eyes. The older man reached into the folds of his dark silk robe and slowly pulled out a small wooden box. He opened it. Resting inside was a flawless, translucent imperial jade ring. A bonding ring. Wei's breath caught in his throat. "Tianyi, I know the timing is imperfect," Tianyi said quietly. "I know the court will riot. I know the scandal will be great." Wei immediately laughed through his tears. "Nothing about us has ever been perfect." Tianyi smiled, a rare, breathtakingly handsome expression. "No, but it has always been real." The emperor gently took Wei's trembling hand. "I spent years denying what I felt for you, because it was impossible, but loving you has become the easiest, most natural thing I have ever done in my life." Tears finally slipped down Wei's cheeks. Nobody had ever loved him this openly, this fearlessly. "If you will allow it," Tianyi whispered, his voice thick with devotion, "I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt your worth again." Wei broke completely, not from pain, but from overwhelming, consuming love. "Yes." Tianyi slipped the cold jade ring onto Wei's finger, sealing the vow. Then he pulled Wei into his arms and kissed him slowly, deeply, as the sun disappeared beneath the distant mountains. The warm spring wind carried the scent of sandalwood and white tea together, perfectly matched, perfectly balanced. And for the first time in a very long time, Lin Wei finally understood exactly what it felt like to be truly chosen. Epilogue. Home. 1 year later, the Heavenly Dragon Pavilion no longer felt like a quiet, lonely retreat. Laughter echoed through the grand halls. Fresh flowers lined the open windows. Warm meals always waited on the tables. Home. Wei stood in the royal study, smiling softly, as he watched the most powerful man in the world struggle to paint a simple bamboo kite for the spring festival. "You are holding the brush entirely wrong," Wei laughed, leaning against the wooden frame. Tianyi looked highly offended, a smudge of black ink on his aristocratic jaw. "I have conquered neighboring kingdoms, Wei." "Yes, my emperor. And yet, a paper kite defeats you." Tianyi dropped the brush and pulled Wei into his lap with a wicked grin. Cruel attendant. Wei smiled brightly against the emperor's chest. The jade ring rested cool and heavy on his finger, a symbol not of ownership, but of absolute devotion, mutual choice, mutual trust. Down in the capital, Jian ruled as the newly reinstated crown prince. He visited occasionally now, awkward, still healing, but trying to be a better man. Time had softened some of the wounds between father and son. It hadn't erased them, but it had softened them. Wei heard Tianyi sigh dramatically at the ruined kite on the table, and both of them burst into warm, easy laughter. Outside, the wind whispered endlessly through the ancient bamboo forest. And inside the imperial pavilion once built on cold isolation, love finally lived there instead. If you want the next part, the uncensored continuation, and more unlimited 18+ ancient royal BL stories, come join Spicy Ancient BL on Patreon. The link is waiting for you in the description and pinned comment.